Welcome to Todd's Lantern, where we discover the history, talent, and charm of St. John, New Brunswick.
Before the mast, we do sea shanties, and I don't know how many public things we've got. I think we're doing Brunswick Day in Granby, Westfield, and well, it's been kind of, live music's been kind of slow during the COVID. We mainly do outdoor things, so but we do have a Facebook site and maybe a website too. Before the mast. Okay. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So. What we're going to do next is, because of time, and I find that crosswalk at the head of St. Patrick kind of dangerous with a group this size, so we're going to cross over here after and head about halfway up. I want to call it Dock Street. Anyway, we're going to go halfway up St. Patrick Street. I'll do a bit more yapping, we'll come down, and then we will cross over there, right? So we might be finished a bit early, Dave. That's okay, we'll see. I don't want to take them all the way up.
You won't get paid.
Okay, well, anyway, so let's talk about the 1840s, because the 1849 riot just didn't pop out of the air. Professor Atchison, who wrote the book on St. John up to 1860, he's described the riot of 1849 as the best planned riot in New Brunswick history. Both sides were planning for it, and they were collecting arms and things like that. And the march through the Catholic ghetto was a definite provocation. Both sides knew that. But we'll talk more about the riot here in a bit. But the thing is, there's a context, there's a background. There was escalation throughout the 1840s. The first major sectarian riot in St. John took place in 1840 on Brussels Street. And we have two experts here on the streets of St. John. What's Brussels Street now?
Prince Edward.
Prince Edward, yeah. And only 109 people were arrested. And so what you'll find, much like in Northern Ireland now, July 12th, right, the Battle of the Boyne, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, these became flashpoints. Also, when people were carousing, New Year's Day, Christmas Day, you'll find outbreaks of violence and vendettas and assaults, often people being injured, sometimes murders, sometimes retaliatory killings, and people were firing off guns. Harold, during the break there a few minutes ago, talked about Squire Manx, who was an Orangeman, I think, from the west side, maybe. One of his pistols, he was actually arrested in the mid-1840s for either attempted murder or murder. The sources are conflicting. He was acquitted, but one of his pistols is in the collection of the New Brunswick Museum. You can find a picture of it online. So both sides were armed. In 1842, there was a riot on July 12th. What provoked that riot? Simply because some Orange Lodge supporters put orange ribbons on a Union Jack outside of a building. And that was enough to set off a riot in 1842. The police force was very weak in St. John at that time. It wasn't really coordinated and professional. The aldermen and councillors were magistrates, and often it was up to the magistrates to go into a crowd and try to get them to disperse and things like that. They weren't always able or willing to do that. On July 12, 1849, it was only the mayor, who was the chief magistrate, and maybe one constable who actually responded to the impending clash of over 1,400 people who were armed, right? So what did the authorities rely on was the British military. We had a small garrison here, and I forget the name of the regiment, the British regiment that was here at the time. So during previous riots, the regiment had been deployed, companies of infantry had been deployed in St. John and in Portland to try to quell things. And on more than one occasion, they deployed a field gun, which is a cannon that you drag behind a horse, loaded with canister shot. And that is a canister containing big balls. It's an anti-personnel weapon. It's a street cleaning weapon, right? And unfortunately, they never fired it off. But that's what they need. That's what they used in the 1840s to try to calm civil disorders in St. John. In 1844-45, the British garrison was called out. March 17th, 1845, the British military deployed an artillery piece either here in Market Square or over in below Fort Howe in Portland, I forget which. It was quiet on March 7th, on St. Paddy's Day, 1847 was kind of quiet, but on July 12th, the Mechanics Institute band. So it wasn't an Orange band, it was a band of the Mechanics Institute, but in that band there were many Orange members. They came into the York Point area, the locals chased them out, and then the members of the band and supporters came back with arms, and there was a brawl, a street fight, and one Roman Catholic was killed, many people were wounded. Again, in many of these cases there were no arrests, and often you see when there's riots, it's hard to identify who the rioters are and things like that, so often even if people are arrested and indicted for riot, they're not convicted, right? So again, weak police force, use of the military, and remember the context of this as well is that as every year went by, not only were more Irish immigrants coming in, but they were Catholic. They were 80% Catholic, 90% Catholic, right? And many of them didn't speak English. They came from poor areas of Ireland. So they were seen as a bit of a threat to many of the people who were already here. And the thing about the Orange Lodge that in New Brunswick that the academic historians have stressed, and I've got a few copies of a reading list. Dave's got a few copies there for later. Is that it spread to the non-Irish Protestant population, right? So it spread to people of English descent, Scottish descent, and of Loyalist descent as well, right? So it was not simply importing Irish troubles into New Brunswick. There was a reservoir of Catholicism and anti-immigrant feeling that was there, right? That's what the academic historians have stressed. And of course, you know, as I mentioned before, the Orange Order also had other functions that made it important in communities. Orange halls were built, for example, right? So it was, you know, there was a social component to it as well. Okay, so we're going to, we might have to do it in 2 crossings, but maybe someone can push the button. We're going to go over to the other side carefully, and we'll wait to everyone. The Irish fighting stick, very useful in faction fights. Anyone ever read up on faction fights? Wait. The only place I've read about faction fights taking place in Canada was in Newfoundland. Faction fights, anyone in Ireland? These were fights within the native Irish community. It could be from the other parish, it could be from just the wrong side of the tracks. And so these were fights within the Catholic community, and people would be blinded, you know, limbs would be broken, sometimes people were killed, and it really got out of hand in the early 1800s. It became a real issue in rural Ireland, and they would take place at races, horse races, fairs, and saints' feast days, which were kind of a holiday, right? So again, the battle would have been used in the faction fights as well. Okay, so let's talk about the riot. So again, this was not a totally spontaneous affair. Both sides kind of knew what the day was about, and they were arming themselves. The plan for the Orange men was the Orange Lodges from St. John were going to welcome their brothers from upriver in York County and Carleton County, Fredericton and St. John. So those guys came down from Fredericton by steamer to the riverside wharfs of Portland, right? And they were met by their brothers from St. John, Carleton, Pisarenko. The St. John Lodge guys met the West Side guys, you know, at the ferry terminal. I think they were going to go back for a banquet at Nethery's Hotel that night, right? And so they marched up through what was then Dock Street into York Point, and because we have a little more time tonight, we are going to go up to the corner and back. So they marched up to the point there, and when they got up to the bridge that separated the two communities, because if you see some of the old maps of St. John, before what some people still call the viaduct was there was a bridge because there was a mill pond, right? That was all filled in later for railway development, industrial development, things like that. So the Irish Catholic immigrants erected a green arch, right? And the Orangemen who came from St. John, they had weapons on them, they had their flags and their banners, but rather than get into a fight on the way to meet their brothers, they marched and they had to dip their banners under the green arch, crossing the bridge. It was sort of humiliating to them. The mayor, I think it was Mayor Wilmot, he was trying to get both sides to disengage, but again, he was hampered by the lack of an effective police force. A lot of the other city councillors were settling on vacation, right? So the British military was deployed, but rather than try to get between the two opponents, the British military set up down there with their field gun pointing up, loaded with canister shot, pointing up this street, right? So to protect the business district, right? That's the heart of St. John in the 1840s. That's where the old city hall used to be, for example. And so the Orangemen got through the arch, feeling a bit humiliated. They marched into Portland. They met their brothers, and then they headed back. The mayor and I think the magistrates in Portland, which is a separate town, tried to convince them, well, you want to go back into the heart of St. John, you want to go parade in King Square or have your banquet, whatever it is. Could you go around and bypass this area, right? And instead go what they called, I think, the Valley Road or the Marsh Road. Anyways, kind of like City Road now through that area there, and then come up and get the King Square. No, we're going through, right? Remember, their slogan that day was victory or death. Both sides had their slogans. So let's go up to the corner because we have a little more time, and we'll stop at the bus shelter up there, okay? Thank you.